to make my big exit. Had to come a lot of ting, no Brexit. She drink a little Henny, now she start to act reckless. Keep the pen handy, case it start to get tests. I'ma pull up in the G playing that pot smoke. I'ma let my NFTs hang like Picasso. They saying life's a game, why you playing like bots though? Ain't that a scary thought? Head running strolling around the pot, just a hand.
Hello.
How we
Doing well. How are you?
Good job. Good. You're looking well.
Yes, it's been a very busy week, but I like busy weeks, and we're ending it off in the best possible way, which is with a discussion about the state of affairs.
Absolutely. Scenario planning, right?
Yes.
So let's go over the rundown. All right. So we all know government's corrupt. There's hidden groups that kind of get in the back door of things, right? So in the scenario, to put it all to rest, to put that nail through the coffin, right? What are we thinking? So as far as the ledger debacle and kind of everything that everybody's talking about with the back door, and what if like the government wants us out? That why would they give us this opportunity on a silver platter for us to see it? Whereas why would they do that? We're just a little guy, right? They're eventually going to squash us, and it's going to be through the backdoor kind of taking of the crypto, or just kind of banning self-custody outright. What if they ban self-custody?
It's a good question, because throughout history, things have been banned on many different occasions, right? Prohibition is one such example. Gold was confiscated, etc. One question that I have to pose to people with this concern, firstly, and I'm largely playing devil's advocate, is, are we concerned about ledgers, or are we concerned about hardware wallets in general?
Hardware wallets in general is what they're saying.
Right. And if we are concerned about hardware wallets in general, the next question, the natural corollary from that, is how do hardware wallets work? And the answer, because obviously we're not going to go into exactly how they work. No one person can, but basically they work as an extension of the blockchain. And so if there's a backdoor in Ledger, from my perspective as a security engineer, I would look into all of the interfaces and get very technical about it. So usually when we talk about backdoors in Ledger, backdoors in hardware wallets, it generally has to do with something other than the hardware wallet, like a backdoor in my computer, a backdoor in the software behind the hardware wallet. And if you believe that, it may be correct. However, that could be said for anything else, whether it's your laptop that you buy, right? Those hardware components could be backdoored. The operating system that you use, that could be backdoored. And so at a certain point, we have to get real specific about what our threat model is, and who our primary threat actors are, and why. And it is, even though it's individual, it's possible to do it incorrectly. Some people are worried about the government when they should be worried about their own, key management, or perhaps their own software selection. If somebody's worried about nation state threat actors, one thing that they have to understand is you can't escape nation state threat actors if your goal is to hide money. At a certain point, you do have to play ball and understand that nation states don't have an interest in squashing investors. And I agree that they're corrupt, but I mean, if you become rich enough, then you're one of the corrupt ones.
And that actually, you bring up a ton of good points there, bro. I do think they're ready to play ball. I mean, they kind of squashed us for the past 6 years now, in a sense. And I feel like if we're looking back to, say, the internet, right? When the internet came out, there was Amazon back then. There was, Microsoft, Apple. So the thing is, I mean, I guess it's a little different because you couldn't take direct ownership of the stock and hold it in a self-custody wallet. I guess there's a little bit of difference there. But you could, back then, I believe it was physical, you got the physical shares.
Yeah, so you can still directly register them.
Yeah. So what you said about, all right, if there's a problem with the hardware to the ledger, then there's a problem with the actual blockchain. Because how I took it is the ledger is your key to access the blockchain and directly kind of do you have your private key, your assets are on the ledger, I mean, on the blockchain stored there, and your
Right.
ledger is just like that key to open up your vault to be able to
Yes.
send stuff out. So, dude, I think that kind of put the nail in the coffin in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's valid to not trust it if you don't trust it personally. But then, yeah, it's you're talking about the blockchain at that point. If there's a hardware backdoor, then that's a backdoor which requires physical access. If there's a software backdoor, then if you believe that it can be remotely exploited, then you'd have to find a backdoor in the authentication mechanism, meaning you'd have to find a way to break a hardware wallet without actually pressing the buttons. You have to find a way to sign one of those transactions
On a mass scale too.
Yes, exactly. So it's one of those things where if that can happen, which I never want to say it's impossible, then you would just have to accept the fact that that would be a cataclysmic event. And I mean, we throw around the term black swan event, but that wouldn't even be a black swan event. A black swan event is something that is not just devastating and unforeseen, but also obvious in retrospect. This wasn't obvious. So it would be more than just a black swan. It would be like an alien invasion. And we have to accept those possibilities. But most people who parrot these issues, one, are not hardware, software, or security engineers. That's fine. I just want to point that out. And two, they probably would be better spending their time working a second job and investing more into whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, if the government or otherwise some advanced persistent threat actor wants to take your assets, you have to think that even if these backdoors exist, how does it compare to the alternative investment strategies like physical assets or dollars for that matter?
Yeah, that's very true. And also a way of hedging against a cataclysmic event, like you said, because it would totally be a devastation to the whole. It's like all the banks going down in a sense. I mean, like it's on that level. So you can hedge by owning physical gold and silver, because at the end of the day, if that sort of event is happening, then we're at the grand finale, and it's very likely that the traditional system is locked up, frozen, and nobody can access their money. And the most valuable asset at that point is physical gold and silver. So you hedge in that sort of sense as well too. I don't think that what's another example of, maybe not with crypto, but of a government or a agency getting backdoor? I think I saw something like a year ago where they got backdoor access into like Signal app, or like it was Twitter or Apple or Google or something, where the government or Facebook, where they're like saying, oh no, your privacy's safe, but like, no, there's a government backdoor where they can come in and do something about it.
Oftentimes the conversations about backdoors, and like you just correctly pointed out, being the platform, Signal is a great example. I've never heard about a backdoor into Signal itself. However, if you're using Signal on a smartphone, then the platform can be backdoored. Backdoor might just be an easy way to say that the platform is vulnerable to remote viewing. Sometimes these things aren't even hacks, like the Pegasus thing, for example. You can remote view through any iPhone. However, not anybody has access to Pegasus. But I digress. The backdoor would oftentimes be against the platform. So a Windows computer, as opposed to Ledger. But the whole point of a hardware wallet is that even if your computer is completely backdoored, keylogged, viruses, assume that the threat actor has the same level of access that you do. You're going back to our previous video, these authentication measures prove that the person who makes the PIN is the person who presses the buttons. So if I actually, we can even experiment with this in real time. You could consensually give me remote access to your computer that you can revoke, some sort of team viewing software that IT help desks use. And I can go ahead and try to sign your transactions for you. And I can. And a lot of times people like to think that, a backdoor would be more complicated than that. But no, the most that some sort of hack will do, or a backdoor will do, is give you the type of access that you would give an IT support technician if you give them full, remote access to your computer. So we can try that. And obviously it has been tried. If I keylog you, there's issues that come from that, but not one of them is stealing your crypto, as long as you're not inputting your seed into the device.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. So say you had access to my computer and I have my ledger plugged in and I forget my password and I have to reset the seed and I'm putting in the seed on my ledger. It's connected to the computer. You're remote viewing me, even though I'm looking at it on my ledger, but it's connected. Can you see that?
No.
Okay.
No way. Now, again, I don't want to say that anything is impossible. However, the ledger or any other hardware wallet for that matter, all that you're doing through the wire, because I've heard a lot of people assert that it's not air gapped because there's a wire. And I understand that, but you have to understand that not all types of data can pass through a wire on all types of devices. The hardware wallets have a pretty skimpy chipset, and that's by design. There's no Wi-Fi interface on them. The Ledger has a Bluetooth interface, but even that, whether it's through a wire or through a Bluetooth interface, to answer your question directly, all that wire is doing is forwarding a decision. Click, you forward a decision. If there was, again, like I said before, if that's not true and I can somehow read your 24 words through the wire, through a remote connection, then I eat my words. But every security researcher to date, and of course, significant work on part of Ledger, has gone into ensuring that basic logic flaw does not exist.
Yeah. And I guess there's two things too. One, it's like, I'm asking everybody that's watching this right now, where did this all come from? Right. So I feel like there's been a mass wave of this question. And so like, I'm wondering where people got this initial kind of information or like concern, as well as while you were talking, I did have like a flash in my brain. I feel like 3 years ago or something like that, there was a release of a report, like unclassified, like whatever, that had already kind of insinuated that the government was looking to get a backdoor into Ledger. I think this maybe something resurfaced. I'm going to try to find what I'm thinking right now, but that may be the case, but I'm just wondering where people found this info in this kind of scenario. So, because then that helps us be able to dig a little bit deeper into the credibility of that source, or even like, and maybe get it from the horse's mouth in a sense. Also, too, maybe I should do a little more kind of connecting the dots on a level of who works at Ledger, who's the CEO, who's the investors, because like, anybody could have did that for FTX or a couple of these other exchanges beforehand and realized, well, this guy, you go into his history, he was a fraud, and this guy's a fraud. So maybe if we can legitimize the Ledger team and see like, yo, these guys are tied up like heavy, like they're locked tight, then maybe that will alleviate some of the concern, at least on a minor level. But yeah, those are some extra steps I guess I could look into. But the real question is, where is this coming from?
That's a great point. You brought up a few very good ideas there that I'd like to unpack. So the first is, I would love to see a source, because I don't abjectly doubt it, but at the same time, it's not true until we can actually have something other than just comments. I think that most people get them from other comments. And I think that the claims that a very secure solution is somehow completely the opposite appeals to the collective skepticism that you see in YouTube comments and Reddit threads, which I completely understand and empathize with. But I just want to point that out. Another thing is, it's interesting because oftentimes these issues can lead us down the wrong path, as we were talking about before. In other words, the Black Swan event to me would be, the 10th exchange completely busting and losing everything, not a random unforeseen event. The backdoor, again, has to be obvious. So if Coinbase went down or Binance, let's say XRP skyrocketed and now there's liquidity issues, which is rather predictable. That's the Black Swan event. We have to use Occam's razor here. Now, I trust the hardware security of Ledger and Trezor the same. There's a trade-off between the two. Ledger doesn't, or is not able to fully open source the firmware on the secure element chip. However, the secure element chip has undergone significant stress testing, and it's very similar to that which we use in our bank cards. The Trezor doesn't have this issue, but they don't have a secure element, and they're able to more easily be physically brute forced. And so you do I think, have more transparency in the way that Trezor architects their devices. They actually open source their circuit boards. But then Ledger, in terms of real world results from independent security auditing, they actually have more resilience against penetration tests. So there is that to note. I want to note one last thing, which is that the thing that can undermine any crypto system whenever you're dealing with this whole array of things, because like you mentioned, 24 words, is the generation of the 24 words. You could call into question, is that entropy sufficiently random? And if you don't believe that it is, there is a solution that you can do. Now, I should know that if Ledger and Trezor are trustworthy, this won't really bring you anything beyond their level of security. But if you had a reason to doubt the supply chain, what you could do is a solution called air gap. There's actually an air gap vault and an air gap wallet. And what they instruct you to do, you can look this up just using, the search queries of the words I'm saying, is you use an SD card and you load the air gap vault onto a random device with Wi-Fi disabled, like a cheap Android phone. Ideally, take out the network interface card. And then you have the air gap wallet. And what you do is basically, you have to trust the entropy of the air gap vault. However, you can look at exactly how it's generated, is you offline generate your seed. Now, I believe personally that Ledger does generate your seed offline because the device doesn't have a Wi-Fi interface, but it's just to say that you can create your own hardware wallet. It's just very inconvenient, and you might have to know how to solder.
And one thing too is you said Trezor is open source, whereas Ledger's closed source. They keep it tight. I feel as if, would you agree that maybe the hardware wallet that has it close knit tight is actually the safer one, because there's less kind of prying eyes looking at how to maybe take advantage of that code or whatever to see how to hack it in some sort of way, whereas Ledger has it close knitted, so it's harder for somebody to kind of figure out the mechanics, whereas anybody in the world could go onto Trezor and get the open source software.
Well, it's definitely a balance. One thing to note is that generally that strategy, which is called security through obscurity, isn't good, because even though it is harder to access that source code, anyone who can reverse engineer it could potentially find a very obvious flaw that would have been corrected by the community. However, another thing that confounds this issue is that while Ledger is closed source, 95% of their stuff is open source. The only thing that is closed source is because they contractually cannot open source the software of the firmware rather of the secure element chip, which is one of their main selling points, is the functionality and resiliency of that chip. But if you look at their Ledger Live, fully open source, you can go on GitHub and look at it, and the code looks solid. Their mobile app, fully open source. And so a lot of people who are worried about these remote threats and stuff, Ledger Live being open source should alleviate that, because you can look at the code and you can see if there's any callbacks. You can run Wireshark and look at the server activity and see that it's not being forwarded to any. In any event, anybody who's going to hack you doesn't work for Ledger. It'd be somebody who's trying to get you to download an inauthentic form of the software. Trezor actually they're not able to open source all of their firmware either. And so they really rank similarly. I think that Trezor might open source a little bit more of their firmware. However, to really circle back to your assertion, I agree that Ledger is more safe, as my personal opinion. So it's just an opinion, because a lot of security is physical security. And I would personally rather take a closed source thing that's very hard to physically brute force rather than something that's open source that has been brute forced. I should note, for anybody listening that has a Trezor, if you enable the passphrase, you're not vulnerable to that physical brute force attack. It was a voltage glitching attack against one of their chipsets that allowed the pin to be extracted. But if you have the passphrase enabled, then you're not vulnerable to it. But overall, I think the Ledger is very solid. They're both great products, but I think the Ledger just kind of edges them out slightly. And I think that anything that is backdoored into a Ledger could be backdoored into a Trezor. And so to a certain point, it is very much a zero-sum game. If one of these devices has a genuine, complete logic flaw, then it probably applies to the blockchain.
Yeah. And that's very true. And something like Bitcoin's blockchain could be hit with a 51% attack. Whereas, so if they get 51% hashing, the hash rate, they can take it or they can crash it. Whereas like something like XRP, way different. I think it's like 80% or something like that. So that's the thing. It depends like what you're holding maybe on your ledger, stuff like that. But also too, maybe we should look at it in the sense of, well, what are these institutions doing? Because like, are they using Ledger? Because if the scenario is like, well, the elite people don't want the small people to win with a lottery ticket, so they're going to crash the Ledger devices or hack it. Well, what are the institutions using right now? Because if they're using Ledger as well too, then that scenario doesn't hold weight. So maybe I got to deep dive into how are these institutions, Fidelity Digital Assets, BlackRock right now, how are they going about their custody? Like I know BlackRock's using Coinbase custody. I think Fidelity might be utilizing Nexo in a sense. But then what is Coinbase? What's the software behind Coinbase custody? Is it their own proprietary thing? Or are they utilizing a little bit of, BitGo? And then BitGo actually, come to find out, uses Ledger. So maybe we can go down the rabbit hole and see how are these institutions securing their bags? Because if we can ride their coattails and do the same thing, and we are thinking that they're going to try to take us out, I mean, we're doing the same thing as them. So if they try to take us out by doing the same thing as them, they're taking themselves out too, I
think that Coinbase uses ledgers. I don't think that they use 100% ledgers. I agree that we should look into that.
Yeah. That'll be a little homework for me after this. Maybe one thing we should do is maybe I'll pull up, if you have like 10 extra minutes, I'll pull up our YouTube videos and maybe go through some of these comments and see what people are saying. Maybe we can do I'll read them off to you and you can kind of validate or defute it.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. Share screen.